Not that much
Do
turkey.
you have an agenda?
That's all.
Good evening, it's okay?
I can. Good evening.
First thing I want to know is, do we want to improve the page? Yes.
So I think we'll just wait one more minute while everyone just gets settled, and then we will start the evening. Thank you, everyone. Your evening, especially a lovely evening, and hopefully again, help yourself to some food and refreshments as the evening goes about. So I do believe we're all seated, who are all here and online present. And so you are the Urban Renewal Chair, so you can go ahead and call the Urban Renewal Budget Committee to order. The first action item will be for the board to nominate a budget and then secretary, and then we'll go into the presentation.
Perfect. We'll call the Wood Village Urban Rural Budget meeting to order April 15th. We're doing the Pledge of Allegiance, I assume. All right. Welcome to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so now we'll take nominations for budget chair.
Correct.
Any nominations for budget chair?
I'll nominate Mark Clark, Counselor Clark. If you're willing. Yes, I am.
All right, first, is there a second?
No, second.
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye. So Chair Clark, we now need a secretary, which will review the minutes once we produce them, and we'll sign off on them.
Is there a motion for a secretary for the budget committee or budget for the budget hearing?
Secretary, right?
Secretary.
No.
I'll nominate Counselor President Tan.
All right.
Are you seconding this?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion is approved. Okay, so Greg, would you please make your presentation?
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. A brief presentation for Urban Renewal, as I think most of you got in your orientation or just in your 5-year updates. Not a lot going to happen in the upcoming years with Urban Renewal, as we did a lot the past few. But for a reminder, this is, let me move our people, there we go. This is our Urban Renewal District. It encompasses about 25% of the entire city, amended in 2019, both the plan and the little bit here it resides. We call it 1520, enough increment to start looking at doing projects. Now, total authorized limit of 11.5. When you look at our performance to date, minimize that. You can see every time we've had new development with an urban renewal agency, so a lot of just flat growth in flat years as we weren't getting development inside the agency. Then we had the Riverwood South development progress, a small development on Halsey. Then the byway was the big one. You can see that tracking in through both the tax imposed and the actual values. And now that's projected to continue throughout the duration of the agency's life. What did happen, though, that was a bit unexpected, and we've talked about this in several meetings and to several extent, the change property ratio. Not going to go into details of what that is, how it's calculated, and the impacts, other than just before the byway was on, the change property ratio for multifamily was just under 50%, meaning you'd capture 50% of essentially that value. When it did come on, it was about a 1/3 of that, meaning we lost about 90,000 in anticipated value of the byway's return to the agency. Nothing we did wrong, nothing the byway did wrong. That's just the county's calculations when they add up all properties of similar type and divide it by the total. That's what you get. So the end result is, instead of taxing about 84 of the 175 units, we're essentially taxing 62, but still, need to provide services to 175. It also did reduce the return to the agency, which impacts the debt payments, which you see here. So we have the blue line are the revenues and the bar graphs are actually our budget. Now, usually you think city, you got to have more revenues than expensive urban renewal agencies, luckily have to operate in debt. It's statute. So while not necessarily anticipated, we thought we'd have a very slim positive margin. We don't, but that's okay because we have enough saved up through our balances to cover the payments through the duration of both the general fund loan and the full faith and credit bond that we have out for the agency. Now, this also doesn't mean if something new comes up, we can't take action on it. We could either refinance the current debt or take out a new or different loan instrument for whatever that incentive may look like. But in terms of the agency doing projects on its own, not really doing anything for the next couple of years as we have that negative margin. So when you look at the taxing authority, it is on the overlapping tax rate of that entire district, not including debt levies. And so that rate changes every year a little bit, but basically you take the increment by the rate and there's your projected total possible revenue of $674,000. Now, we actually don't budget that because there's always uncollectibles for a variety of reasons. We use 7% in this case. Now, one thing to note for uncollectibles, we eventually do collect them, which is why you see prior year. So as either properties get foreclosed upon or catch up on back taxes, those portions go back to us. We always get made whole, just not always in 1 year. So total revenue after uncollectibles, we have $628,000. So where's that going to go? Mostly to debt. So here are all the revenues here. This is a bit of interest. We really like the interest rates lately. So I have a bit for personnel, and that's to manage the budget process, the audit process, and to answer questions from potential developers or people coming interested in maybe developing or wondering what they could do inside that district. We have materials and services. Most of that's the audit, and then the debt, and we'll break that down here. So for materials and supplies, basically, it's the audit, and that's the biggest. There's two big drivers from previous year to this year: audit cost increases, and just a bit more on the operating contingency.
And
Yes,
so that's year over year?
correct.
From
Prior
last
year
year?
change. So we have a little bit more dues, books, periodicals, advertising, because we do have to advertise the budget hearings, that kind of thing. Again, the biggest change was the audit and then our operating contingency. Now, where was all that money gone? We just like to reiterate these success stories over the past several years. So we have the Mock Rock along Arata Road, this building and its amenities, including the redeveloped parking lot, the splash pad, what it brought to the park. We have the cross rocks on Halsey, the solar self-compacting trash cans along Halsey and other parts of the agency. We have the North Gateway sign and a portion of the new restroom that is wrapping up probably the latter part of next month. We had hoped to underground power on Halsey. That was removed about 1.5 years ago, as it just was no longer, the overall value wasn't there for the board. Decided that's where we got the solar self-compacting trash cans and the portion to the restroom. So when you look at that debt service, so I said we had 2 outstanding debts, one from the general fund. This was taken out some years ago and actually made a nice, it was mutually beneficial. The agency had some money to operate and do some small projects, and the general fund, the city, had a nice, reasonable investment instrument with the interest at 4%. Then we took out the bonds in May of 2020, which was, we have the principal and the interest payment there, with the bulk of that going to the projects previously mentioned. So when you look at our fund balance, you see as we spend down the debt for the bonds, we're spending, it's coming from savings, but then it ticks right back up again. And there's still a bit of margin there for, like I said, for a small development project that comes in, or the board can meet and have that discussion with the developer and and look at either refinancing or taking out a new instrument, depending on what that project may look like. But as stated in a lot of the orientations or in the 5-year, if someone were to walk in the door tomorrow, it takes about 3 years for any size of projects to actually really get underway, would be between looking at the incentive agreement with between the agency and the city, design review, plan review, and getting through the process. So even if something were to walk in tomorrow, it's most likely wouldn't have to budget it in the upcoming fiscal year. So we always do keep 400,000 in capital outlay, again, for small opportunity projects, but there's nothing specific tied to those funds. And so with short of a project, we will not be spending that money, and that would go to the board before anything actually is allocated. So again, not really planning to do much because we've done a lot over the past few years. We're paying off that debt. Short of a new project coming in, we're just going to focus on paying off that debt over the next several years. We could also use that time to look at what is next for the agency and the remaining tax increment financing available, which is, call it about 6 million. And that you can divide that up between both incentivizing new development and also what's good for the broader community inside the district. So here are recommendations for the budget. It is 2 motion, one for the budget itself, the other to actually collect the tax. What questions may I answer?
Are there any? We also have budget Meriwether online if she has any questions.
I don't, thank you.
Okay. So if there's no questions, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the URA budget for fiscal year 2025-26 and recommend adoption to the board.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Sounds like the motion passed unanimously. So then we also have to authorize the collection of 100% of the available proceeds from the division of the tax.
I move to authorize raising the maximum amount of property taxes to the incremental values in the Wood Village Urban Renewal District.
A second.
We have a first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do I have a vote from Victoria?
Yes, aye.
Okay, so we have unanimous vote there as well.
Well, thank you all very much. That wraps up the urban renewal budget. And so now, if you so choose, you for the some food to go and go home and enjoy this beautiful evening. You can still sit there. You're just not on the board to vote. But I'd imagine the board would be open to questions you may have about the budget
Oh, yeah. Very pleased.
and your food. Yeah.
So that concludes the urban renewal.
When it's closed, we can close that. And now we have to wait 2 minutes to start the city one because we have to wait until 6 o'clock.
In 2 minutes.
That's right.
And then we'll go to the other.
Those were interesting. Being from other people, like being publicized eating. It's like I'm not going for a sandwich.
You
You're
know,
doing it, you're doing
I'm
it.
doing it. I'm hungry. There's no shame in my game when it comes to eating.
Okay, well, then I won't tell you to have mayonnaise on your food. Don't dance.
Yeah. I love it. When you pass this kind of stuff on.
You're like, tables are turned.
You know, I've been fuming all day long because the bond signs were gone off of Wood Village Boulevard. And here I found out you guys did.
We were mowing the lawn.
This,
Oh.
you haven't actually talked to you first. And I'm really happy about that because I'm down to 2 signs. And I was holding those 2 to put them back up. Yeah. Well, I feel a little better because everybody else gets their signs taken too. All right,
So John, mine's up.
okay. I'm doing drive-bys too for everybody that I give signs to.
I'm pretty sure that's what Jeff told us last time.
Mine's there.
He's going to be checking every day.
Don't worry, sir.
It's now 6 o'clock, so let you have a drink there and we can, the city budget committee hearing, which has a few more introductory steps than the urban renewal.
All right. We will now call the April 15th Wood Village Budget Committee meeting to order. We will skip the Pledge of Allegiance, but we have a quorum. And so we will elect an officer, a chair for the Budget Committee.
I nominate Dara Tan.
I'll second it.
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope.
We didn't hear from Victoria.
I'm sorry, I said aye. I feel like I'm screaming at you guys.
Then you gotta call for a secretary.
She might need the gavel. I'm teasing, but
No, she needs it.
she needs it.
Of course she does.
Do we have anyone that wants to nominate a secretary?
Madam Chair, I nominate Budget Commissioner Teresa Rios Campos.
I second.
Oh, you're in trouble now.
Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Waiting on Victoria again.
We got it. She texted, she said.
Oh, okay. Oh, there.
So in the next one, we do need to open the Oregon Shared Revenue Proposed Hearing.
Oh, we're opening the Oregon Shared Revenue Proposed Hearing.
No comments, you may close.
All right, meeting's closed, or hearing's closed. And then next we have Budget Officer presentation. To you.
That is me. All right, thank you very much for continuing to meet. Over the next 472 slides, we'll walk through all the city. So for those that were here last year, it's it's both a very similar presentation as well as budget, with the big change being in fire and fire service and those impacts. And we'll walk through everything in 400 slides. So we walk through the budget structure, our revenues, expenses, operating budgets versus total budgets and what that means and why it's important. We always do discretionary items at the end. So there are capital items or budgetary items that are my recommendation already built into the budget. And there's a few items that are discretionary at the end. What I will mention, it's very few items this year, the bulk of which are related to fire. And then we do have to do some interesting things in terms of the motion regarding Play East, because the director of Play East is also on the committee. So we separate those motions and we walk through that at the end. So this is how we structurally function the budget. We made this change a few years ago to put everything into functional areas where you see the numbers, whether it's 10, 30, 60, 70. Those are the first prefixes of the budget itself, the budget category numbers. When you look at green, that's predominantly contracted out for services. Where a blue dot is there's actually a separate dedicated narrative section in your budget. And we've developed this presentation to walk through the budget as it is in your budget packet and narrative. So fund organization under general fund, it's a lot of what you think of a city does. It's the public safety, it's parks, it's planning, it's public works. We do our events and then the kind of the running of the city. We call the street fund special revenue because it is a restricted revenue source, predominantly consisting of gas tax. Enterprise funds, think of those as also restricted, but more business enterprises. Those are our water and sewer funds. Several years ago, we developed a capital sinking fund, and those are revenues that are increasing every year allocated to specific capital replacement. So as we need a new backhoe, dump truck, parts of this building or other equipment, there's the fund building up over time to do that. And then the internal service funds are basically shared services through all the funds. So how do we do in the current year? Well, fire is fire all the time. But you know, it's being reviewed as a three-city effort. I'll say a very positive three-city effort, which is, you know, getting one city on board can be hard enough to get monumental, and it's been a very positive progression. We're still working with Gresham on what next year may look like, but we think we have something structured that just works for all partners and parties. For our utilities, we did sewer flow monitoring on our main trunk line to understand its capacities and what it may need in terms of upsizing or other improvements to our system. We also scoped our entire sewer system of the city to look for condition, repairs, maintenance, and also cleared up some, we'll call it fog, that's fats, oils, and grease, and that can restrict flow through the line. So we got those areas to always do quarterly hotspots, areas that we know are building up, but we always check our system periodically about every 5 years or so and cleaned out some of those unknown areas. For streets, the big one is our upcoming crosswalk at Riverwood Street. So it's an RFB, so the same one as here on Halsey. That should be starting in the next month or so. They want to wait on the parts, actual beacons themselves as a longer lead time. They're waiting to get those in so they can just do the project in one fell swoop. Will be done this fiscal year. We didn't do a street resurfacing project this year as we accumulated the funds from this year into next to do a larger project. As you knew, we were looking at our sewer system to probably tear up some stuff, and we want to do a larger street project with that. Lots in parks this year. So we have the restroom, current photo here, but you saw it as you drove in, scheduled to be finished latter part of May. So that'll be great, right in time for summer. The other project right out front here is that ADA pathway to the other portions of the park, but also including enhanced picnicking and barbecue spots. Also some benches just behind the splash pad out of the splash zone. And then wrapping up this week will be our community garden just behind the building. It's quite beautiful and getting a lot of interest. So administratively, we did a compensation study. We do that every 3 years to make sure both we're in line with what's reasonable and also competitive for the market for all our entire staff. Collective bargaining, which we're in with our Public Works Union. New permit software should be finished probably next month or so, give or take. That's a state required mandate, but we worked through an extension with the state supposed to be in place January 1st. We didn't like the state's product that it offered us, so we found a very cost effective, more user friendly software. And then lots of grants for that new wetland park at the corner of Woodville's Boulevard and Nerada. That'll be constructed next year. So you'll see those funds roll over into that for its construction. For our budget, current year on track with revenues and expenses, which is great. So beginning balances. So beginning balances are important because you look at, it's a nice barometer of how the funds are doing over time. And are you dipping into savings, which you can, and that's especially good for those one-times or those capital projects. Not so good if you're using it for operations. So when we look at our beginning fund balances, you can see they're increasing. There's a couple that didn't. One for Park SCC, we just didn't get the revenues we thought we might have. We always kind of budget for that, but again, for system development charges, we don't spend it unless there's a project and we have that revenue. For water fund, the difference here is we've been really investing into the water system capital, and we had that well 3 project that we upsized a bit for the VFD and enhanced control units for that. So that's why that was a capital investment into that system, not using it for operations. Otherwise, we're looking really good. I will say the bulk of the general fund, we're still holding on some ARPA funds as we haven't quite paid off the different projects we're working with there. And then we've got the grants for the wetland park, but still it's very positive. So significant revenue features, again, highlights from the 5-year that we presented. So interest rates, we really liked where we have them, but we're projecting those are essentially flattening out and not continuing. Property tax, we already talked about the byway and the assessment, the change property ratio loss for that. But in terms of the city, we can pretty much count on that steady increase. Business income tax, while it has been increasing, we're projecting flat, given the unknowns of the broader market. But again, as stated in that 5-year, this is collected countywide, distributed back based on population. So we've had population growth, and also a large portion of that overall revenue is generated by a small percentage of very large business and industry. So hopefully that is relatively flat and stable. Franchise fees stable, and then we're seeing really good growth in utility revenues, predominantly due to our population growth. We've got more people, so they're using more of our water, more of our sewer. Also, state shared revenues are based on population. And just so everyone's aware of our population, it was projected for a decline, actually, as Portland State Population Research Center, which is the state designated population estimator for the entire state. They wanted to do a correction of overestimating the population. We showed how that wasn't in fact true. And so instead of going down to population to our 2020 numbers, we're actually going to go up slightly to 5,100 people. So we not only retained, we gained a little bit, hence the increased population growth in our projections.
Greg, would you go back to the previous slide, please?
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to call attention to that because the city staff needs to be complimented. Those ending fund balances are growing. And that is so important in what we're doing right now with expenses coming, of course, with fire. But when you see a ending fund balance growing as our revenue is decreasing each year that we're collecting property taxes, this is well managed, and I think all of us can take some solace in that trajectory there. So nice work there.
But there's a purpose, though, that he's saving money so that in next year's budget, we're going to be spending it.
Well,
Yeah, wait.
that's the idea.
There's some
yes.
spending there.
Yeah.
Sure, we'll get
There's
into
gonna be some
that.
big lump sum spending, and then it's going to be. a
Again,
course
hopefully
correction.
more, you can think of it more as one time. And that's what we're trying to do, is build up something to be one time or a very short time in transition to a different option. So in looking at the outcome, so again, another good news piece, all operating budgets in this budget have revenues in excess of costs. I will say for the general fund, that margin is about razor thin due to fire and that increased cost, but still a positive margin. Now, some of the future investments coming from savings, but operations, it's positive. Same overall staffing level, that's remained flat and consistent. And we made some adjustments to our compensation for 2 positions based on that compensation study, but relatively stable personnel costs through the period. Our capital sinking funds in good health, and we've planned for that equipment, again, backhoe, dump truck, software, the SCADA, so that's what runs the wells and lift stations, and then bits and pieces of City Hall, so over time we have the resource to replace large components of that, and this is all built into the budget. So we have recommended capital, and again, discretionary at the end, which again, most related to our future of fire. So total budget for all funds. Now this is inclusive of ending fund balances and contingencies, so not operations. But again, you can see, budgets are increasing. Parks SDC, again, we explained what that one was as a result of, and water fund with that investment. But essentially, it's a very stable budget, even given the unknowns of the future and the systems. So when you look at total reserves, contingencies, and ending fund balances, they're good. Actually, for the budget committee to be aware of, the city council did adopt a contingency policy where there's essentially, you could think of it as 2 90-day policies to make sure that there's reserves enough for if we didn't get revenues or an unknown, an incident, there are monies available to continue city operations without taking on debt, whether short or long term. And we funded the long-term contingencies for both. When you look at what the city does, this is what makes a dream work, is this team right here. This is everything from field operations, parks maintenance, to the friendly faces at City Hall. This is what makes the magic happen. Again, we have about 15 more people contracted out, whether it's through police, fire, 911, building inspection, and planning services. So when you look at our staffing, you can see positions have been relatively flat over the years, despite our growth, despite our projects. Staff is relatively flat and actually below a peak number. Now, when you look at total wages, we were very fortunate for a very long time, both in terms of a relatively flat cost of living, but we also had people who had been topped out of their range that otherwise retired or moved to a new position. When we bring someone in, it's generally lower than that person had been paying. The last several years, it's a good problem. We've retained people, the new hires we've brought on, they've been staying. And also we've had very high inflation the last few years, upwards of 7 and 8% back-to-back years there. So this is all reflected of both retaining staff and some of those years of higher cost of living. Our staff is our greatest asset. I can't do anything without them. This presentation wouldn't be before you this evening without them. And we know last year at this time, we had recently lost our public works directors. What are we going to do? So we did another little reorganization that split public works into 2 fields there, and that's working out really well, at least for some. I know Becky loves projects. But in all seriousness, it's worked out really well to both grow our people and continue the great works that we're doing. Pay compensation was done, and we also make sure in every budget we have training for our people, whether it's our field personnel for their CEUs, to office staff, making sure that they're up on the latest and greatest of how to use various softwares or new ways of doing things, which again, we still have our reengineering program that if someone finds a new way of doing things that saves the city money, they can earn up to 25% of those savings for them as the rest goes to the city. We also have our education reimbursement program that's been utilized pretty well the last few years, which has helped with retention of quality employees. So we had another one recently complete that work here, and then we have another one in the upcoming budget. So it's a great program, both as a recruitment tool, but also as a longevity to and retention tool. So again, we have about 15 people in contracts. Inflation this year is at 3%. Our COLA is actually capped at 4%, but we've planned for 3% for our COLA. Insurances, both in terms of just city general liability, but also that medical insurance continues to increase. We have a good provider, that City County Insurance Services. They try to buy down that rate, try to flatten as best as possible, but also what's going on in the global economy, there's only so much you can do. When we talk about merit-based compensation, that's for those working through their step progression. It averages about 6%. A step is 5. You can get a little more depending on your performance. So we project some, as we saw in the previous slides, it kind of flattens out a little bit as people top out, and then it turns into a merit-based bonus program, which is a slightly smaller percentage. PERS rates continue to do PERS things and continue to grow, but we do have We've seen savings from the side account that was established a couple of years ago, and we did have money in the current year's budget to make another deposit in that side account, but we held off for 2 reasons. One, we were still getting really good interest on that money just sitting in the city's general fund and didn't want to necessarily lock that up in a PERS investment. But also, as we learned, the state will be doing a match again, as we did a couple years ago. So if we wait till July, we get a partial match of that funds to leverage the dollar. So that seemed to make sense, both with the interest we were getting and now actually get more dollars for those dollars. So when you look at total salaries, about $41,000 or 3%, which is COLA. So it's all good. When you look at personnel's percent of total operations, it can be a bit skewed because materials and supplies includes the contracts for those contracted services. But generally, this is how it breaks up between personnel and materials and supplies and those year-over-year comparisons. And now I'm going to finally pause. You can hear a different voice for a little bit.
Mayor, committee members,
I'm going to take you through the general fund. Before turning it back over to Greg so that he can recap our total revenue situation. So all the funds, all the operating funds are going to be presented where we show you the operating totals and then the total budget. So the operations is what we primarily focus on because that tells us kind of how healthy the funds are. The total budget includes a lot of things that like the fund balances, the contingencies, grants, one-time monies that come in. All of which are great, but we try and focus on maintaining service levels on what our operations are. So you can see here all of the major revenues in the general fund, what's been happening to them, slight growth in a number of areas, flat growth in others, a little bit smaller growth in some areas, but overall, there's about a 3% growth in our operating revenues. To get from our operating to our total, you still have to add in the beginning fund balance. You have to add in one-time funding, and you also need to add in the grants and transfers in. So that's how we go from talking to an operating budget of around 2.8 million to a total budget of 8.7 is you got to bring in our fund balance and all those on the revenue side. One of the oddities of budget is when you transfer money between funds, that gets double counted. So when we transfer money to the internal service fund and the operating funds pay that, we have to budget both the transfer and the expenditure. So we have about $1.2 million in the budget that are transfers. So that's essentially counted twice because when the general fund sends money to sewer, we got to budget the 550 that it sends, and then we have to actually budget for sewer to spend it. So it ends up being 1.1 million. So it's a great way to double your money without any effort. Now, unfortunately, the bank will let us pull it out after we've doubled it. So that is the problem. So this just kind of shows kind of which funds. So the way to read this is the general fund is sending out 609,000 and receiving 137,000. So sending money to the sinking fund and sewer, and parks is sending money to the general fund for the wetland. So you can see the sinking fund is just receiving money. It's not actually sending money out. It will in the future when it actually has to transfer money for projects that we've been putting money away for. You'll see these pie charts, and it'll be very common. We show the operating revenues and talk about kind of the revenue makeup, for the general fund, property tax, franchise fees, BIT, and state shared revenues, and motel tax. Those 5 revenue sources make up 75% of our operations. Building permits is restricted, and then we have some smaller fees, but really we tend to focus on those the ones that make up the bulk of where we get our money to be able to provide services, primarily, which is public safety. To go from operating to total, that's where these gray slices come in, and you saw how we have a big, healthy beginning fund balance because we knew we were going to be facing some challenges with our fire service providers. And how to bridge that gap. Then you also get the grants and one-time revenue and transfers in. And again, you don't want to budget on these because once you spend them once, they're gone. You really want to make sure that you're balancing your operating revenues and operating expenditures to ensure the long-term health of the city. So the biggest revenue is property tax. As Greg went through on the urban renewal, we could do a similar projection. We actually dropped this cap of growth. It's statutorily at 3%, but because the urban renewal area has locked up part of that tax increment financing, we know we're never going to hit that until the agency dissolves and the taxes are remitted back to the underlying jurisdictions. We're not projecting any additional value being added. We're just kind of capping that growth. And so this is just a little bit more detail of how we do that. But at the end of the day, our budget's going up about $30,000, which is about 3% of what which you should generally expect. So that's the funding side. What do we spend the money on? Because as Councilor Clark pointed out, money's great, but cities, we want to get that into services and things on the ground. So here's what we're spending. And as you can see, broken up into operating and total. And to get from total to operating, you got to take a look at your contingencies, which Greg mentioned. We now have a contingency policy. And then debt service to pay back the full faith and credit loan for the Urban Renewal Agency, and then our unappropriated ending fund balances. Biggest increase is fire. Our public safety costs are jumping almost 30%. And that's because our fire contract went up about $400,000. So that's all of what that is. And each of these you'll see in the narrative section, but this is just an overall, and this is where Greg, so here's our total resources from the slide before, and here's our total expenses. So last year we had an operating margin of about $434,000. That's where the money that we get to do our capital projects for the general fund comes from. This year, we are positive, but just barely. And next, that drove conversations with fire. We knew that multiple years of that type of increase was not going to be sustainable for the general fund. And we covered that as part of the 5-year presentation. This is another way of looking at our expenditures. We look at operating expenses. You can see public safety. We do a lot of wonderful things with parks and events and building services and recreation, but the general fund is public safety. You can see that here in the pie graph. We have, again, a lot of budgetary categories, number shuffling, but what we actually do is public safety because there's a lot of capital that's included in there. If it wasn't for the capital, it wouldn't be that large. And speaking of general fund capital, I believe this is where I turn this back over to Greg. He used to tell you about the fun stuff we do with money.
But don't worry, Erica will be up shortly to talk about you don't have to hear my voice all night, is what I'm saying. All right, so general fund capital. So this is everything that's already baked into the budget. The wetlands park is the biggest one, obviously, as we've accumulated grants, have a few more, another grant that's still pending out there, but planning for construction in this upcoming budget year. We actually did get a community garden expansion grant. We got notified today, so we can actually do some more to the community garden. And so we'll plan that in the upcoming fiscal year. Our continuing sports field or multi-purpose field, call it upkeep. Wouldn't really call it restoration, but it's just doing the aeration, the fertilizing, overseeding, top dressing, keeping it in the condition it is. That's what that costs. And we are replacing one public works operations vehicle in the upcoming year. It'll be our 2009. So most fleet ages, you look at 12 to 14 years, kind of at the long end. This will be at 16. We also learned from our 2019 utility body truck, that's a great kind of style to have for our operation. So we're looking to replace with something like that. And you'll see that carried over through the other funds. So for the summary, as stated, it's a positive margin, but just barely. And the capital is the bulk of it going towards the park, the new park wetland, which is substantially grant funded. So move on to public safety because that's what's driving a lot of discussion lately. So great partnership with the sheriff's office. They gave us a very, very reasonable increase this year. We are still working with Gresham. So for those who were at the meeting last week, you know where that landed. For those who didn't, we had a 3-city council meeting last Wednesday with the councils of Wood Village, Fairview, and Troutdale to talk about the future of fire and what happens next year and beyond. There was a lot of Gresham folks in the audience, including its mayor, council members, its fire staff, which while the councils at the meeting said, yep, moving towards a district makes the most sense, we want to move towards that. Gresham came back and said, hey, cities, what does it look like maybe instead of changing in 80 days, what does a 1-year extension look like? And we're working with Gresham on what that could look like. So everyone has kind of a glide path towards this future. So, but we've based our number on Gresham's number, and we're still working through what maybe a 1-year contract with Gresham could look like as we move and transition towards that district. BOAC 911, again, a relatively reasonable, steady increase there. And then we did include, so we have monies right now that working towards, education and outreach and polling. As we know, we'll need to do a lot of work around this changing financial situation with fire. And we've continued that into the next budget year, as that's when the bulk of the work really need to materialize as we transition both what kind of fire service we're having and how that's funded. And then a change is, instead of lumping in the per site account and under just admin, which was a fund we've gotten rid of as we were doing it by function area, this is the portion of that per site account that's under public safety. So as you look at the portions of staff time allocated to public safety, that's this portions of the per site account. So this is not per site account for like the sheriff's office or Gresham Fire. This is per site account for city employees towards their time managing those contracts and services, which if the last 6 months have proved wise, it's not enough time that we've allocated towards fire. I'm glad that someone laughed. That was supposed to be a joke.
I just quickly back on that slide, Greg.
Yes.
You know, as we sit here as the budget committee, you know, we look at that fire number, that's the number that's increased the largest. And as you mentioned before, that's not going to change unless we find a different manner to cover that cost.
Yeah, to help reiterate, thank you, Mayor. So this 960 was Gresham's year one lead-in price. It continued to escalate throughout the period, capping at essentially $3 per thousand of value. And as we saw, our tax rate is $3.12 per thousand for value. And at that rate, it opened up a lot of other potentials and possibilities, which led to our discussions and now partnership with Clackamas County Fire District number 1. Now, what that may look like in that transition is most likely some sort of contracting for a period, moving towards an annexation vote consideration by the communities collectively. So that is correct that we didn't talk with Clackamas 1 because we thought, hey, let's raise everyone's tax rate. It's the cost of fire has changed for us. We were able to get with Gresham somewhere between the marginal or average cost to them to provide the service. That is going away. Since that's gone away, it opens up a lot of other possibilities, and we've had great positive connections with Clackamas District 1, and are moving towards that for our future. Understanding that another year to help, again, that glide path, so we're not harming Gresham firefighters and what that may look like for them. And it gives time for District 1 and us to transition, communicate to our communities and public why the change, what that will look like, and the positive aspects of all of this. Other questions before I hand it over to Erica for the next hour and a half?
No, thanks for that, Greg.
All right, all the fun stuff. We're going to reiterate some things that Seth and Greg already went through, but then kind of go through some of the projects. First, we'll go over the parks SDCs, which Greg already touched on, and why this year is just a little bit less, but I don't know. There's not really much to add.
Basically, again, to just reiterate, system development charges, those are paid by new development and connections into our system for both parks, water, and sewer. There's an adopted methodology, with those revenues being restricted to projects that add capacity. In this case, that capacity is a new wetlands park, so using the park system SCCs to help build out that new park.
We're actually using a portion of them on the restroom, because we're pulling a portion of the ARPA funding from the restroom to cover the additional cost of the CDBG 88 pathway project.
Yes.
But teamwork.
All right, so over the parks and general fund. So parks, which just covers the Donald Robertson Park, and then just general cleanup. Really the biggest thing to look at this is the increase and explaining that increase in parks. As you all know, we've adjusted and updated our utility fees. So moving forward, we'll actually be charging the parks fund for the irrigation usage. So it's not that we're using any more water or anything that's really changed. It's just that this fund will now be paying for what it's been used in the past. And so you could see that is the biggest increase was that park irrigation for the almost $25,000 addition. We also added for electricity just for the new restroom. Before there was kind of just two sides, you get the general lighting, heating, kind of just three different sections, and then hand dryers. And now that we're going to have 8 individual sections, there's going to be more electricity just to function all of that. So that's what that increase is for. And then as we've talked about the community garden, that will be managed by Outgrowing Hunger. So we have added that for future years. And those are really just the biggest increases for coming up in parks. Again, as we've already talked, some of the capital projects for parks, we are continuing that field restoration, just to maintain the field. And then we have the wetland park project coming up, which you can see the design in the bottom corner, right corner. And about 125,000 coming from SDCs, Metro, huge portion from Metro grants, and then a little bit from the general fund. And then like Greg said, we did get notified for that community garden grant. So we'll be adding, so that is exciting. For building services actually just is really just a net zero account. So everything balances out, but it does cover building inspections, rental property, housing. And you can see the difference in this is just that one time, almost 32,000. That was
Per side account.
Yes, the per site account. So you'll see that through all of the accounts. Streets, and does anybody have any questions on parks or building? Okay. So streets and stormwater, which this covers signs, pavement, our annual catch basin cleaning, our Cedar Lane vault storm cleaning, permitting, the street sweeping, lights, leaf collection, all of the goods. So for the revenues, you can see most of our revenue comes from gas tax and the utility fee. And then on the right side, so as before, you'll see kind of our revenues and operating that you'll see the beginning fund balance, and we do not have anything transferring in.
So I have a question there.
Yeah.
On our state gas tax, and we're saving money towards our street repair work and things like that. In saving that over a period of 3 years, do we have to report that to the state that we're doing that and collecting savings from that?
So, and I'll probably call on an audible to Seth here when I fumble this. So yes, state gas tax are restricted revenues towards the maintenance and condition of streets, with 1% going towards non-streets, such as our trail system. So we do always spend that on the wood chips through the park is essentially our trail system. And between the other works that we do maintaining what's included in streets, such as like the leaf collection, the storm work, and our street utility fee, just because we hold off on a capital piece, we're still good on the restricted revenue portion of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we're just accumulating funds for 1 year. So normally we do $125 to $150 project, depending on the scope of what we're doing. This year, we've budgeted a $300,000 project, again, to be in line with the work that Erica and the team have done on the sewer scoping and identifying the areas that make sense for streets as well as for water and sewer and storm line repair.
And so still spent on that restricted fund category and budgeted both this current year and in next year in that category in compliance with state
So
law.
by combining that through 1 year, they don't have a problem with that.
Correct.
Okay.
Because it's still being spent on that restricted section.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So here's the pie chart, just so you can see a different view of the operating revenues. You can very much see how the utility fee and gas tax are what build that street fund. And then how it has just a healthy beginning balance. Again, here's another way of looking at it. With a lot of our, in public works, personnel is kind of a big chunk of what the operating expenses covers, and then materials and supplies, and then just the indirect expenses. And then on the right side, you can kind of see it again, just separated differently. The operating requirements, as Seth talked about earlier, you can see that below too. And you can see that we sit above what our requirements are. So we're in the positive. Some of the capital projects and streets that we've talked about, we always kind of hold for some county enhancements. But then for this coming year, we're going to look at putting, put more into our streets, since we did skip our street projects this year, but really just a bigger utility.
Becky was waiting for that.
Pause. So you'll see some monies going into the other funds too for these street projects, but then also just some camera and Vector for our storm lines, just as we did in our sewer, but just kind of isolated areas. And then also this fund will put in for the new vehicle as well. Any questions on streets?
Is there an area that we have more streets that we need to repair?
That's what we're going to start compiling and looking at. I believe we have some areas in the Upper Village that we're looking at doing that will have sewer and streets. Not sure if there's going to be anything water related, but we're going to do a whole overlook on what highest priorities are and see where we can kind of layer.
So we just set the 350 with an assumption that we're gonna kind of fix most of it? Not
So
knowing-
we're looking at it in ideally 3 buckets. You'd look at what's the condition of your sewer system, your water system, and the street surface itself. Our water system is pretty good. And since with our recent camera work of the sewer system, we know there are trouble spots that need some repairs and replacements. And we're going to match that up with some of our worst condition roads. So as we have to dig it up anyway, instead of doing a crack and slurry seal, we're essentially planning for more of a grind and overlay as we have to patch back what we fixed for sewer anyway.
Right.
And it restores, the kind of the whole surface as a newer surface. And so, as we said, we usually plan 125 or so. That gets you a crack and slurry on a reasonable section of our streets here. But we're planning more for a grind and overlay on a section of street coupled with a sewer project. So what you'll see is this is just the street restoration portion of that project. In sewer, there'll be a sewer fix-it allocation.
Gotcha.
So if that makes sense, how we're using this current year's funding with this budget's funding to really do a bigger street project.
Yeah, Councilor Tam, one of the worst things that happens in larger cities is that they call it the first backhoe in after they've rebuilt a street, and they'll have say a new development come in, or they'll find that they had a sewer line that they forgot about, or they've got a utility company that wants to come in and put in underground utilities of some type that they didn't think about. And then they end up tearing up a $5 million street in doing so, and they have to allow it to happen. So Wood Village really watches out for that kind of thing. That's the last thing we want to do. Upper Wood Village had that problem with, it was Comcast, not Comcast, but it was Ziply Fibers.
Verizon.
They came in and just ripped my street out and it's still visible right now. So that's one of the last things we want to have happen. And that was during Randy Jones's period of time as the Director of
Yeah,
Public
about
Works.
2010-ish, but that's where we know the Upper Village has some streets that need some attention. And we also know there's some opportunity sites in the sewer system. So we're targeting, we haven't picked the exact street, the exact location, but that's kind of where we're honing in on.
And since the street utility fee was originally passed, we've done a slurry and overlay or a slurry and seal on all of the city-owned roads.
I think 2.5 times. I don't think we did
Yeah.
3, but every street since about 2010, every street's had at least twice now a crack and slurry seal. And now we're looking to where some of the streets that need more than that to make them, and it's one thing to still do a grind and overlay. It's another when they've crumbled so much. You're doing what we had to do on Cedar Lane, which is rip up all of it, and it gets very expensive very quickly.
And that little meter down there in the middle of that slide shows that we collectively in our streets, we're still above 75%. Or
76.
whatever it measures. I mean,
Yeah.
depth of, I don't know what it measures.
Overall condition of your
Pavement quality
streets.
index. Yeah.
And so.
Pavement.
Pavement condition index.
Pavement condition index.
So we're in good condition, but like Greg said, instead of just doing a crack and seal like slurry, we're going to be taking up probably more of the street, and so we need more materials for that. So there's just more costly projects.
You know that Portland is way down like at 30 or something like that.
Yeah.
They used to be 20 years ago, they were way up in the green. And it's unfortunate that they've let theirs go like they have.
Well, our goal is to stay in the green.
52 miles.
So the utility SCC charges, this is just showing kind of what we plan for every last year. So we always transfer SDC funds into the water and sewer, and that's not necessarily because that money is going to be spent or that it can be spent. We like to do that in case something comes up and it's eligible for being used, for the SCCs being used. So last year, money that was transferred in, some of that was actually used for the well 3 capacity analysis that we completed. And then for the sewer, a portion of that was for the master plan. So it's really just if we can and if something comes up type of money that's getting transferred over. So in water, we've talked about SCADA. That's an ongoing that controls all of our wells and our booster station without having to actually be on site, and gives us all of the alarming. So we know if there's any issues. Every year we do generator testing and valve can maintenance, meter register replacements, which we're heavy on right now. And then sampling, hydrant maintenance, training, our wells, reservoirs, booster, and all of those good things. And this, that top right picture is actually from that leak that we found on Walnut that was repaired, so.
This picture in the right-hand top corner, what is that?
So that's the Walnut water line repair that or the service line, I should say, that we found a couple weeks ago.
This is the Walnut leak repair. And then this is a testing sample station.
That I knew, but I didn't understand this.
Yeah, so
orange
it basically,
pipe.
That was,
it shows how much water was pumping out of the pipe, and they had to use basically a suction hose to clear all the water out to repair the service line.
Oh, my gosh.
That's the one we've been talking about.
that you nailed it and found it.
For our production
Yeah.
results this month.
That was the big one.
Wow.
Yes, so this tiny, I don't know if you can see, this tiny little line right here was causing a lot of water issues. So that's the service line to a house on Walnut. And then this bottom left is the inside of our booster station,
Which one?
the one up at Cherry Park.
Oh, my gosh, that's
Mhm.
it. Really changed.
Yep. So we just have the one. We're looking at potentially adding another one at the Reservoir One site.
Beautiful.
Um,
Me. Okay.
I think it's beautiful too.
Oh, good.
we enjoy it. So here's the breakdown of, you could tell most of the water, the revenues come from user fees, from our utility fees. And then a little bit just from other fees, interest, new hookups, hydrants, and all of that. And then the transfer in that you see on the right, that's from the SDC fund. Again, another great way of seeing that all of the revenue basically comes from water user fees. So, and then, yes, just a different way. So beginning balance, still healthy, user fees, and then SDC charges. Here you could see our, just like, you know, streets, the personnel, that's a huge chunk of where our expenditures go, materials and supplies, and then indirect expenses. And then for the requirements that we have for water, we are still above that in our fund balance, so.
Just a question, not about the budget, but the changes in our water fees and sewer fees. Have you, is that still going pretty smooth, or have you had much comments or feedback on that?
I'll say some words and then I can be corrected. It's been, I think there's been a good number of positives. Again, you don't always hear everything positive because people like something and they like it and they don't feel the need to share it with the world. There's been a few people came in with, I'll call it some concerns / complaints. Some of those actually, we found out they had leaks going on their property. Because if you remember from the old rate structure, you could use a lot more water, but only pay a little increment more in your bill. With the new kind of pay as you use model, their bill increased quite dramatically. And it was something that I didn't know my toilet, you know, maybe their toilet's running a little bit, faucet's dripping a little bit, didn't realize actually how much water that can really consume in a month. So with our, offered the no cost leak detection, we're able to confirm like, no, this is why your bill's so high because of those things. And most of them have been, I think it's, which again, not saying that's cheap to fix, but it's, it's not like a broken service line or something, a pipe inside the home. There's been a few others who, kind of regardless, it's still a utility bill. There are other expenses, costs are going up all around. But we have our utility assistance program that we offer to people twice per year, which has been utilized and is appreciated. So I would say, generally, it's favorable with some mixed comments and things. And then we will see, though, come out to the summer with, people watering lawns, watering gardens. Now, the water side, we kept, the use per unit. It's a steady use. And then for sewers based on winter consumption. So great, water your lawn, water your garden. We structured it to not have to pay sewer on that by that winter consumption and that winter averaging. So hopefully, we keep revenue solid and keep a reasonable rate structure for people just to, use the utility system as they need with relative affordability, if that all makes sense.
Maybe it's, go ahead.
I have two other comments on that related to the rate structure. When we made this change, we knew that this was going to incentivize some conservation. We're not really sure how that's going to shake out. It's probably going to be at least a year before we can know, as people see the bills, make these adjustments, and realize they have the ability to lower water usage. That's generally a good thing, not always financially a good thing. So that'll be the first point, is we will need to follow up in about a year to see what the revenue impacts of people being more conscientious about their water use are for the city. The second one is, I love water and our water metering and our water reading, because it's not often you get to argue with multiple PhDs on whether or not their data is good or not. But how we got our population numbers back up was we used our water data, and we said this data is read every month. We go out and physically touch each one of these, and if there's an error or a leak, people know because their bill goes up. So there's a built-in error checking system where the data they were using was a lot of DMV and voter registration, which can be a year, 2 or 3 older, and people sometimes let those things lapse and don't correct them. It's like this is a monthly read. We have the data. If there's, bad meters, bad registers, we have a program to identify those. And we also have feedback from our residents who are having to cut checks if we're getting out of line. So we have some very good confidence in our water usage numbers compared to what you guys are using.
It's, well, I appreciate hearing the report. It might be a good idea, come a month or two to remind people, that part of the change now, remember, is on water consumption. So think about it when they're watering their lawns, and it could be a opportune time.
And
that we might-
another piece just to add again, while the investment in the meters and updated registers, we've been able to, while your bill has a pretty simplistic, kind of unit read, on the newer registers, we can go back and actually pull the whole consumption data, kind of as hour by hour, is it 15? Anyway, we can pull good consumption data to show like, this is when you legitimately use this water. We're trying to move towards a system in the next couple of years where we can even do that real time at City Hall and say, oh, you've got a leak, or wow, your consumption did something abnormal. The other thing is Odessa's looking at putting in a car wash for its own internal retail reconditioning. So we're hopeful that that uses a lot of water.
Get that water.
Use that one.
Everyone's car is dirty.
Because he watched it.
And just to clarify on our how far back we can read, it depends on the meter. So some of our meters, we can read up to the last 3 months. Some of them are the last 45 days, but like Greg said, hopefully in the next few years, we'll have a system that will be cloud-based, and we'll have, that data will be a year back that people can look at, so. Some of the capital projects for water are the continual radio reads, which will help us get to that cloud-based system. Same with water meters. Don't know why that sounded. And then chlorine analyzers, which is actually what you see on the right side. This is what we have in our wells and then at our booster station. So these actually track our chlorine residual. Every 2.5 minutes, we get a new residual. So it's continuous all day, every day. We will see that. It'll be our first indicator if anything's going funky in our wells before it hits the customers. So we have 2 more that we need to replace, just to update our 20-year-old equipment. And then we are looking into a design for our booster station at our Reservoir One site. As some of you know, we have a system that was set up, I believe it was 2010, at Well 4 site, where if we had to take Well 2 down or anything at the reservoirs kind of in our upper system, then we would be able to utilize Well 4 to feed the upper system for water. Every time that it has happened, we've needed to do a boil water notice. Hasn't been ideal. So we're actually looking at putting a booster station at Reservoir One so that we can feed both systems kind of interchangeably and give it good redundancy. We can then look at, since we looked at Well 3 and kind of did a whole analysis on that, it would give us the opportunity to then look at our Well 2 site, which has been holding strong, and we love that, but it is also very aged and could probably use being looked at.
And just another quick note about the booster at Reservoir One. It had a booster prior to 2010, and the idea was to update it, replace it. But with the Well 4, again, in the theory and in short term, Well 4 actually can feed the upper system. But in your long-term outages, or like you said, you're taking parts of the upper system offline, it just doesn't work, I think, as we hoped or the modeling showed. So a lot of the underground infrastructure is still in place. at Reservoir One for that booster. So we're looking at the actual more just booster facility itself and re-exploring what all those pipes, where they go.
All right, and then here you can see the funds for the utility project with the streets. We put in 100,000 just for water. Again, we believe our water system's pretty good, but just in case, we know we do have leaks somewhere. Hopefully we found a good one these last couple weeks, but if there is something else that we find, then we have the funds to cover that and fit that in potentially. We always have water main breaks in, and then the added operations vehicle would also come out of water. Any questions on water? So lastly, so sewer. Again, our sewer that controls and runs, provides all of the alerts for our lift stations and Parshall that go over to Fairview jurisdiction before it hits over to the Gresham treatment plant. Maintenance, Greg talked about our quarterly hotspots. Again, we have generators at our lift stations just for any issues there. We do annual maintenance on those. Lateral repairs for if there's any issues that come up. The last few years, we've been doing about 2 each year, except for this last year, while we were looking at our whole sewer system, the flow door calibration, and then the wastewater treatment with Gresham. Again, you can see that most of the revenues come from the user fees, and then you see the beginning fund balance and then transfers in, which we already talked about earlier. Just another way of looking at where our revenues come from. And then those, this year we have a good amount of transfers in, and then a good beginning balance. And here, once again, you can see those operating requirements that we implemented. We are still above, our balance is above that. So we are good.
If I could just add another point, when you look at that operating margin, especially compared to water. So we've been doing essentially COLA increases, cost of living increases for water and sewer, but the last couple of years been adding about 4% to sewer, understanding we've got that trunk line project, whether it's upsizing or finding some alternative ways to gain capacity through that line. So that's why you're seeing that kind of margin there. It's actually, it would have been a bit more, but as you saw, Gresham treatment costs are going up more than our rates. But luckily, between all of that, we're still healthy in terms of the margin and investing into that capital needs of the system for future growth.
What's their explanation for the increase in the treatment rate? Is it, I know we bought capacity while I was still on council. Is it because we're doing more?
No, Gresham a few years ago, and it's really hard to find the full information. They didn't put it on all of their website. I mean, we've
Wasn't on social media.
but they did all around utility rate increases for water, sewer, for all customers, whether you're residential or, I'll call it wholesale industrial. This is a rate structure that's just being followed with year over year, kind of those double-digit increases. Looking at Gresham, looking at its system and what it needs for that future growth, maintenance, and operations.
And this is the last year of those 4-year increases, which I think were 7, 14, 14 were the 4-year. They are currently working on their next set and have told us they will send that over once it's completed.
And I think it's interesting because you can look at cities, and we were in this spot about 10, 12 years ago where we had a number of people asking why our rates were so high relative to other communities. And it was because we were always annually increasing those rates to keep up with inflation and costs to maintain in the system. as other cities chose not to for a variety of reasons. The reasons are their own. At some point, there is a bill to be paid as systems fall apart, as people need wage increases. There's a bill to be paid, and there's a number of cities doing multiple years of significant double-digit increases, talking 20 to 30% increases year over year. I don't know what Gresham did, call it the last decade to keep up with its costs, obviously needed some kind of correction. And so just all of its customers are paying for that correction, which is the philosophy of the council and budget committee has been, yeah, it hurts to increase every year. Everyone's got to pay a little more. It hurts less. You can build it in every year. Okay, a little bit more versus wait 5 years and now it's a sudden shock to the system. So that's been our philosophy, and it's turned to work out relatively well. And you go back 12 years where we were one of the higher rates. We're kind of middle of the pack now, as everyone else has had to catch up.
So going back into the 1980s, when I first got into public works, 1983, the EPA was driving force then to try to minimize the amount of work that they had to do with small cities such as Wood Village, in forcing them to join bigger cities to save them time and effort in maintaining their jurisdiction over us by forcing us to combine and going in with larger cities. And they were telling us that we would save money by doing so. And now you see what's happened is that we are now the stepchildren to these larger corporations, as I'll call it, because Grisham is, they do have what they have. They've outsourced their wastewater treatment, and a lot of cities even have operating companies that operate their water and wastewater because they don't want to have to deal with it. And then now they're forced to have to deal with a contractor who is putting them on the edge of they've got them basically in a shell of saying, well, you're going to have to pay for this. And then they're just operating their costs out the window and they have no way of controlling it now. So these corporations are making money in operating their water and wastewater. And I knew that this was going to happen in the 1980s when this all came about. And there's absolutely nothing we can do as citizens to combat it.
All right, so we've talked about these capital projects, but just to go over them last time, the street project, we have monies in there to fix sewer as well. We have so we're looking at the trunk line design. That's where a lot of our budget is going towards. We've been talking about this for a few years, but after all of the camera work that we've completed and looking at all of our trouble areas in the sewer system, we feel like we can reduce some of that flow in our system and potentially elongate kind of what we need to do on that trunk line, not sure. But if we do some manholes, sealing, reducing some of the I&I, a lot of the I&I, we know that's a huge problem in our system. So that's kind of what we would like to focus on, as well as still exploring what those options are size-wise for our trunk line, and what that actual capacity actually looks like in that line. Anything else?
I think just to restate, to summarize, we've got the money in there for a trunk line design. It also, we think it might be more beneficial to invest that into tightening up the system, as about 1 inch of rain equals 1 million gallons of flow through the trunk line. And the current flows right now, it can handle what we're producing through that system. And then looking at future growth projections, short of the former Greyhound Park site, there's not a lot of other housing units or big commercial development kind of in that next, when you think of 5 to 10 year, 15 pipeline. And if we reduce that 1 million gallons, per inch of rain flow, what kind of capacity does that give us for that incremental development that will come up over the next 5, 10 years? And is that a better overall value for our community and our ratepayers to essentially tighten up the system, utilize what's still there, make some adjustments, obviously. But until we really get that big driver of increased capacity needs, we may not actually have to increase capacity and have everyone pay for that now. versus using, which is predominantly ARPA funds to tighten up the system, save on treatment costs, and also just save on a large capital project.
Earlier, we talked about sewer pipe project being strategically done with a streets project. But we didn't talk about it with water, but water has that same $100,000 pipe project scheduled. So are we gonna try to do a sewer and a water and a street coordinated?
Ideally, that is the perfect trifecta of a project. But given that we haven't pinpointed it yet, we don't know. We also, you know, there are advantages. Maybe there's a bad valve or bad something that we can just kind of interject with it. But certainly we're looking for sewer is, you know, where are those failed areas and how does that tie in with our I&I reduction strategies?
So we're more apt to do the sewer, but it could turn out to be two different road projects that we have to pay for.
It'll be one road project for sure. Most likely focused on where sewer has the biggest need. Because again, the water, for the most part in our system is good and fine. Spot repairs here and there are some oddities and just not sure if that will line up with where the sewer and street is. Those are the priorities. If water fits in, that's again, that perfect trifecta. Planning for it, not sure if it'll actually happen though.
Any more questions on sewer? All right, you get Seth again.
Becky wants to say something.
There's a question that when do we get the pie?
Well, I was gonna say,
Oh.
this is our last pie chart. That's,
So there you go.
so
All right.
take a little break.
Good 5-minute break for pie.
That's good.
Sherry's does not, and we checked the Vancouver Sherry's and they do not have the pies that they once had. I have Marie Callender's and
pie charts until we eat pie.
So there's still an assortment, a good assortment of pies.
Remember.
Next year, we just have to move to bar charts.
Cobbler thinking, well, actually, that was a thought. Let's do an ice cream cake where I have the layers. Okay, only 3 more hours to go. We got this.
That's past my bedtime.
Like if looks could kill, I just was killed by Counselor Tan.
Oh, I know.
Twice.
Notice I do that look.
Twice.
I do that look with everybody, not just my kids. I realize that.
Oh, my back is killing me.
No, we're on the back side of our presentation. Didn't laugh.
You gotta chuckle from the gut though.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Don't know what's on back there, but. Oh, sorry. I'll also give you a few seconds when I say we're back online to. The big.
They used to do like.
There's like 50 million pies and cobblers in there, so please go eat something. We need some help. Somebody went a little nuts.
Oh.
You? No, not me. Somebody else went a little nuts.
It was me.
Was it you?
I was told.
Having a hard time, you know.
He's like, fire, we're fire, we're fire. This is why we can't afford fire, right?
I did not see anything in that budget.
We'll see in our next meeting.
Actually, it's actually less than we spent on pies last year, so.
Graduated. When?
Let's see how good this is.
Good?
Not bad.
I mean, it's no shit.
How's lemon? Lemon
Exactly.
tree very pretty, but the lemon
So
flower is
we knew it
sweet.
wouldn't be Sherry's. We were hopeful it was still edible.
But the
Decent.
fruit of that poor lemon is impossible to eat.
I remember that song.
We were looking up, because these are from a store, obviously, so we're looking up like bakeries that still do like kind of in-house pies. They want like $45 a pie.
Oh.
Like, we don't have county money to waste on pie.
County money.
Well, how about the, what was that? Water district that they go to Hawaii for their meetings?
It was technically not the water district, but the self-insurance arm of the water district, a
Mm.
legally separate entity that would charge the water district.
I was speaking of Los Angeles County or Los Angeles City of Los Angeles. Where she went to Africa, how many times? 3, 4?
Fact finding.
Fact finding.
Just looking at.
Where she promised to never go.
It amazes me that they don't ever find out this stuff, you
It's
know?
hard to find good employees. Sometimes you gotta travel a little further to boost employer.
Let's take a vote on that.
She'll be reelected, I'm sure.
Depends on which parts of LA burned.
How much, what?
It depends on which parts of LA burned.
That little fish was really popular,
What low fish?
but they were
Smelt.
protecting.
Oh,
You know what? My Indian tribe burial grounds are right underneath like the Orville.
really?
All right.
Sorry. Should be one more minute.
Huh.
That's all we get?
We can still eat your pies and.
Okay.
So if we could all.
Counselor Tan, you got to bring us back to order.
Yeah, there's a straggler over there.
The gal, you gotta,
Are we,
Gavel it isn't.
Yeah, and.
are we
he doesn't
ready
even have
to
pie.
resume, Counselor?
And he doesn't
Tell
even
that
have
counselor,
pie.
he sit down.
Jesus.
Yes.
Always
Madam
winning.
Chair. Sit down.
It's just a moment to put us back off the black screen. We will resume.
Madam Chair, committee members, Now that we've gotten through the boring stuff that has pictures, we're gonna get right into the data tables.
Goes forward.
So administration covers a number of areas, the first of which is community engagement and events. This covers all the wonderful events that you know and love that we put on. And again, we have one-time funding here for the per site account, which again is based off of how much personnel is budgeted. No major changes, although we do shorten food drives, holiday food drives to food drives as council is still considering how that program is changing to meet the needs of our community. We have a joint program, Play East with Recreation, or Recreation with Fairview. The IGA was renewed again in spring of 2023, and it has a 3% or 4% increase in cost for this next year. And this goes to fund the administration portion of that. The rest is, the programming is all funded by fees and donations. And then the last part, which is the really fun part, is the non-departmental. This is where all the weird budget stuff gets put. It's like the closet that you never clean out. There is an increase in internal service funds. And then we pick up non-parks capital, which we don't have any, transfers out, contingency, debt service for the Urban Renewal Agency, and unappropriated on any fund balance. Another part of administration that we've been building up to is we converted the municipal building fund, which helped construct this facility, into a capital sinking fund. Now, the operating funds had been accumulating resources for the backhoe, dump truck, and accounting software. With the completion of this building, we are now putting money away for the replacement of the major systems, your heating, electrical, HVAC, all kind of plumbing, anything that's not the foundation or framing, which we're hoping we're never going to have to replace. And then we added SCADA as that project wrapped up. We kind of started putting money away for replacement of components as they were needed. And then the last 2 years, we've put away funds into playground equipment to replace the play structure out here. That comes up. And so there's been discussions at Parks Committee of how much life's left in that and when that needs to be looked at.
Quick question. Is that just this coming up fiscal budgeted, or is this everything as a whole that we've been doing for?
This is the cumulative amounts that have been put away for these projects. Yeah.
If you go back one slide on the unappropriated ending fund balance.
Yes.
So it's about 3 times now. How much of that is related to the new mandate that a minimum be held, and how much of it is savings?
The contingency represents the 290-day fund balances. The rest of the unappropriated is unrestricted. So that 1.9 million, but we haven't gotten to the capital or discretionary for general fund yet. And
Okay.
Greg's got some ideas about how we can spend that.
Understand that? Okay.
Yeah, Greg got ideas.
No.
The buck stops here is what he told me. Don't let anyone else take the blame.
Love to spend. City government's not to make savings accounts. It's
Yeah.
to
Mhm.
provide
No.
resources.
We've got plans. Internal service fund. So this is the fund that accumulates for all of our operating funds, things that are used for joint purposes, postage, auditing, legal, planning, utilities, communications, computers, maintenance for commonly used buildings and grounds. This is really stuff that would be really hard to allocate out. So we put it in here and do have a formula for allocating out those costs. So there is some increases, and we'll go over kind of what those are, but this is who ends up paying. These are the general fund, sewer fund, and water fund pay about a third, with the street fund picking up a little bit and a tiny bit for urban renewal, just so that they feel like they're included. So first, general government, this is where we do our Play East scholarships, and also the scholarships that get awarded at in the summer for continuing education. We move that from the general fund to here. This is where a lot of our facilitator for the annual treat, appreciation dinner, council discretionary, training for council, and then all of the communication devices that the council uses so that we don't have to cut down a tree every time we want to print a budget document. And relatively flat. There's a marginal increase, but not a lot has changed here. Admin and finance, this is where all of our auditing, legal, planning, insurance gets paid out of. We also do our software licensing and computers, as well as the phone systems for the employees that we use, and training. So what got added, insurance has continued to increase substantially, and that's not something we really have. It's not because we've been going out and getting into accidents or knocking out support beams from this room. It's been industry-wide. We also, as Greg noted, put in some education reimbursement for our employees as we're having employees continue to take advantage of that program. Code enforcement, this is the Troutdale Court. This is we've had an IGA with them since 2017, 2018. This didn't really get up and running until they were trying to get it up and running, then COVID hit. And so we got like a 3-year payment that they had asked for, and then we waited a couple of years for another one. They're now going to be doing that billing annually, and so we're putting the money to pay for whatever the Troutdale Court takes a look at their total costs and their total money in, and we pay whatever the tickets don't cover, essentially, is what that is. And it's $10,000 is a lot, but they do about $160,000 to $170,000 of civil fines and tickets in a year.
Yeah, most of that's related to sheriff's office patrol and law enforcement. And so then it cited into the Troutdale Municipal Court for both Wood Village, Fairview, and Troutdale. So instead of going through the county court system, they will do the bulk of their work in the Troutdale one, which then saves on the backside sheriff's office costs, which was reflected in our lower annual increase there. So yes, we're paying the difference in what citation revenue brings in Troutdale's actual cost, but it also saves on the back end to sheriff's office as it's kind of a one-stop shop and not doing it the larger court system.
And that way, if you get a traffic violation, you don't have to go to downtown Portland, and you can just go out to Troutdale. Not that you ever want to go to court, but if you had to pick. Public Works admin has costs directly related to Public Works. Again, utilities, communication, vehicle repair. The big changes here were we did have some increases in operations utilities at the ops building and communications, and that was mostly around when we upgraded the SCADA system, we got new internet, new firewalls got installed to make sure that that system was secure. There's also some additional work that had to be done around when we switched to this dedicated cell phone cell communication system with the remote sites. And then the savings were education reimbursement moved. And this moves depending on where the employee, which position is included. And the fat oil and grease program, we decided was more appropriate to move to administration rather than just as Public Works. So that's the big changes. Then the non-departmental, some small changes, mostly the municipal Wi-Fi that we have here at the park doesn't cost as much as we originally budgeted. And we're actually decreasing the budget for splash pad water after 3 years of raising it continually. We finally found the upper limit of how much water could be used. And based on the actuals from the last 2 summers, we were fairly confident that we don't have to put as much padding in there. After the first year really surprised us when the 1 month bill was higher than the old annual bill for this building. So good news on splash pad. And now I'll turn it back over to Greg so he can tell you how we're going to spend the rest of the money.
Invest the money, and we're taking it home here for the budget. So when you look at all funds for operations, you can compare year over year. And again, the large increase is, it's that fire on the public safety side there. So what does that mean? Speaking of fire, so this is the capital outlay proposed in the budget. So again, we have the wetland park substantially funded with outside grants. This is the field, we call it restoration, but it's really the updating and maintaining of the sports field, the grant for the community garden, capital sinking, this is that Multnomah County for streets and then our streets projects. Continuing on to the next slide. So these are just totals from that first page there. All the investments into water with everything Erica talked about, the street projects, and then that vehicle replacement as it went through all funds. So you have this was already in the budget. So all the slides you saw, the expensive, this is baked in to what you saw inclusive of then when you saw the margin, this is already included. So there's still margin there. So when you look at total, again, when you look at total, those are those contingencies and unappropriated ending fund balances. Again, the biggest one, change parks SDCs. We just didn't get those revenues. Everything else is either growing or stable. Obviously, it makes sense for the capital sinking fund. We're not spending anything out of that, or at least for the next decade or so. So that will continue to grow, and you'll see those increases as we invest that increment every year into the appropriate category. Now we get to discretionary, and where we take those unappropriated ending fund balances that are unrestricted. What do we do with that? Because as Commissioner or Committee Member Harden said, the cities aren't in the business of holding savings accounts. Obviously, you need to have your rainy day funds, savings up for those one times. And I think it's raining. So all fire all the time. What we've done is, in addition to what we had for the kind of the rollover for fire outreach or the polling, is an additional 50,000 for that work, as we're looking at a large effort to both educate our communities on why and why the general fund can no longer support essentially paying more than it receives in property taxes just for one public safety service. We have on contract Praxis PR, as well as then a polling firm that will do the education as well as kind of testing, strategies and what we need to do more for education on. In terms of our transition to Clackamas Fire District number 1, we're waiting on a formal kind of letter of intent that we can take to the council for approval for what we're hoping is a July 1, 2026 start date. What I say hoping for is that we're successful in a reasonable one-year extension with Gresham, which gives everyone, including the firefighters at Gresham, an understanding of what the following year will maintain. But as part of the District 1 transition, we know we need to invest in some kind of capital. We haven't had to in 30 years. I'm kind of briefly reiterating from Wednesday. There'll be a piece of a new fire engine, a Type 1 apparatus. This is essentially the down payment for that, as well as needs for a temporary fire station. As we heard from last week, there will be a new fire station kind of in between Wood Village and Fairview, housing a second company. Where that location is, we haven't landed on it yet. Obviously, it's temporary, so we're not building a giant fire mahal. Play on Taj Mahal. This would most likely be, an existing space that we can retrofit, or bringing in, portable offices, portable sleeping units, and safe storage for those apparatus. We've talked with District 1 about that, and they actually say they'd rather invest into people and equipment than grand facilities that very few people get to see or otherwise utilize. The money's better spent in equipment and people. So they're fine with temporary, and even in their permanent ones, their station cost is dramatically less than I think other places around. Fun fact, we're coming up on the city's 75th anniversary next year. So it'll be February, be our 75th year of incorporation. And so part of discretionary is a bit of money to hold a to-do, if you would. Our last big to-do was our 50th. I was there for it. It was at had a spread of food and cake and old articles and fireworks. Not sure what we'd want to do, but this is for you all to consider. If we want to do something celebratory, something, there's funds to do that. And this is in the current budget year from the budget adjustment we made about a month or so ago. We included some booster station design work. We're just rolling that over, but that is in the discretionary. So we have the funds that were baked in. We also will then want to add in what would be the rollover. So to do basically a full design workup for that booster. That is it. For some of you who've been around for a lot of budgets, you've known that sometimes there's 3 or 4 pages of discretionary. The big one really is, and the cost drivers are those fire costs for that transition to District 1. You pull that out and there's a little bit for general fund and a little bit for water. But because of that transition and the need, I think, to tell our community members, we are investing as we're asking them to also make a different level of investment. This is what we're asking you all to consider. So unlike past years, I think we actually do have a little bit of individual slides. I've talked through it all. So with that, what questions do we have about any of the budget? And I'm just going to go back to the discretionary capital here.
You said that the cooperation between the three cities on fire has been great. And I went to that meeting last week and it seems like all three cities are on the same page. Do we know, are they also putting money into their budgets for station apparatus?
So with the latest kind of renewal proposal with Gresham, in doing so, Fairview and Wood Village and Fairview said Troutdale, because your increase is percentage-wise the least, you should have first dollars into District 1. And Troutdale was okay with that, even though they're transitioning to a different city manager next fiscal year. They print the email, hold us accountable to this. We'll be first dollars in. So that's great and taken care of. Fairview is still working through its transitions and an understanding of its overall budget picture, projections, et cetera. So how we structure this is now Troutdale will be more first dollars in. We will probably have to front load more, understanding that Fairview would probably pay us back at a different time. This would be the maximum amount we'd put in, most likely, hopefully less than that for year one. But we want to have the capacity to make sure that we make District 1 possible for July 1, 2026, and the investments needed in the upcoming fiscal year to make that happen in a positive way. Understand, it looks like Troutdale will be first dollars in, and we may have to pick up a larger portion of Fairview at the start, paid back, maybe throughout the years. If that all kind of makes sense. So I think we're looking for shared costs, understanding we do have some money in the bank account to make sure it happens without harming any of our neighbors and making it positive through the three cities.
That was going to be my comment about you've got your numbers here. And hopefully those numbers are not conservative, and they're going to be enough to pull this off and in that first year. So that's the only comment I would make, is that let's make sure we have enough to pull it off if there's some glitches someplace.
The other cities are committed to District 1.
No, I get that.
So I mean,
I'm not worried.
He's talking about the budget.
I'm not worried about that.
Well, I mean,
I'm
for
not-
their budgets too. So this isn't the only money going into it.
No, I recognize that. All I'm saying is make sure it's enough.
Yes.
And I won't, we have estimates on the fire station. We got estimates on what it costs to buy an engine from Fire District 1. So
I think Councilor Minor's just worried that we don't want the hiccup on our end as a city
Correct.
to be because of our budget.
No,
If we're going out and we're buying pizza with two of our friends, we have enough money to make sure that at the end of the day, if they forgot their wallets, we can get out the door with the pizza and they'll pay us back afterwards. I think that's the approach we've taken, is that we want to make sure we have enough money year one if we have to.
We can create
Drag
an
the rest
MOU
of
to
them
do so
through
as
the
well.
restaurant experience.
well, I think that's what I wanted to hear.
I would also want to point out, because it was mentioned, in talking with Gresham about a 1-year extension, well, if you have all this money, why are you upset about the proposals? And the response was, well, this is an investment into the future and we're getting something different. And these are essentially kind of one-time startup costs, not agreeing to ongoing costs without a sustainable financial model behind it.
Is Clackamas Fire District 1 4-man team?
Yes.
So we're getting something better than.
Well, and we'd be getting two companies. So for the three cities, instead of a 3-person company, understanding there are other area stations to respond, the initial District 1 launch would be, 2 stations with 4-person companies, adding on also in the latter, as it matures and works, whether, hopefully, get that annexation. And they were also talking about staging more of the interface wildland equipment, given the general risk, especially in the Troutdale area, but also understanding what kind of medical response is needed and what kind of personnel and equipment could be useful for that. So minimum 2 4-person companies, with then adding on to it based on service need, demand, and risk.
Where's Scott? We don't need a ladder truck. We don't need a ladder truck.
No, I know.
Yeah, we're not gonna pay for
We
a
don't have
ladder truck
anything
that we'll
at all.
never use.
I'm just, but having the, Greg said there's other stations that can respond, and that's a good thing because they can't go into a fire, which is 3 people, unless the rules have changed. So at least one other station had to respond every time we had a fire.
And that was District 1's proposal. If it were to start this July, or like a 7-person, a 3-person company and a 4-person company, to give the 7 to do the first response to an actual structure fire. If Gresham Fire wasn't available for the mutual aid, there are other stations about 12, 15 minutes away. At least they can do the initial attack while their other apparatus are coming from a little further out. So that was the approach for, a 75 days from now start. We think, we can get to a positive place with Gresham to, again, safely land this for everybody and get a good product for July 1, 2026.
And if we, buy pizza, but we decide we also need some salad and some cinnamon nuts, did the council build a mechanism into their required minimum ending fund balance whereby you can allow yourselves to spend some of it?
So in terms of the minimum ending fund balance, it can be spent down. It just then triggers discussions and reports to the council/budget committee as appropriate. So that's the framework. And if it doesn't meet it, there needs to be a reason why and reporting. So we don't get into a spot like some of our neighbors have where all of a sudden you think you have this reserves and then you don't, and no one knows why or when. So any more thoughts, questions on budget, discretionary, fire? It's all fire all the time. Walk through. So if there are no additional questions, comments, or thoughts. These are the suggested and recommended motions. There is an alternative motion. If you're not ready to adopt the hearing, we do have it already date set of May 20th. Otherwise, you're free to adopt. So the first one is levying the permanent rate. We then have the second motion is needed, which excludes recreation. And then the third one would add that back in where the recreation director would have to abstain from that.
Motion?
I move to authorize the property tax levy of the permanent tax rate for the city of Wood Village in the amount of 3.1262 per thousand of assessed value.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Want to wait for Councillor Clark to come back?
Oh, shoot.
And then also for the, motions second, 2 and 3, sorry. We don't have to put in the as amended because we didn't amend anything.
Well, the as amended would be the discretionary capital.
Okay.
So thank you for bringing that, because if you want to add in that discretionary capital, it'll be as amended by the budget committee, including the discretionary capital. But I mean, Chair, you can run it. You can wait for Councillor Clark or keep moving forward.
Okay, do we have another motion?
I move to recommend the city council adoption of the 25-26 budget, excluding recreation services as amended by the budget committee,
That's inclusive of discretionary capital.
inclusive of discretionary capital. Thank you.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Does the mayor just say aye? Is that the one he can?
He can say aye to that one.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, you know better than me, Mayor. I just.
And Victoria says aye. And then the third motion,
Which that's.
No, I will recuse myself from this vote.
And we are on number
Three.
three. I move to recommend the city council adoption of the 2025-26 budget for the recreation services as amended by the budget committee.
we have a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Counselor Clark? We've moved to approve all three motions that's listed on here. Do you agree?
Yes.
All right, well, that formally concludes our budget. So thank you all very much for your time, your work, your efforts, reviewing the budget. Confidence in the city staff, and the large work that will be in front of us coming year for fire. Both, working with Gresham on that transition period to working towards District 1 and the heavy investments needed to make that possible. So thank you all very much. And thank you, Victoria, for your being online and for transitioning to text votes. Those are appreciated. And just any other questions I may answer before we adjourn.
Can I take a piece?
Do we have
by
another
the
council meeting before the end of this month?
Yes.
Yes, and we have a council meeting on Tuesday.
And then we also have our Easter.
Easter event on Saturday, 11 to 2 o'clock is the actual event time. If you want to volunteer, I think Caroline's been in touch with most of you. I believe it's showing up around, I want to say 9:30 or 10.
She said 10 to 10:15.
Okay, yeah, so that works. So a lot of activities, a lot of great time. We even have a nice fun scavenger hunt. So weather should be actually pretty decent, not a super sunny, great day, but a nice one that encourages people to come, have a good time, and then maybe move on with a different activity for their day or with this family. So upcoming events, Easter on Saturday, and then council meeting on the 22nd, where we at least hope to not provide the full terms and conditions and vote on a Gresham renewal, 1-year renewal, and a District 1 letter of intent, but present it to you, make sure it passes, and then we'd bring that to you in May for adoption is the plan.
All right, that concludes our meeting.
Thank you all very much.
Yay. Way to go, Madam Chair.